My name is Michael Carter, and what I'm about to tell you is the most terrifying experience of my life. Even today, when the loneliness of night wraps my apartment in darkness, those memories shake me to my core. This incident happened about 3 years ago, when I moved from San Diego to New Orleans for a new job. I was looking for a place to rent in the French Quarter area. That's when I found a beautiful Victorian-style house on a quiet street just off Bourbon Street. 2 stories, hardwood floors, ornate moldings, and surprisingly cheap rent. When I asked the real estate agent why such a gorgeous property was going for half the market rate, she hesitated before answering. "The owner is motivated to rent it quickly," she said with a tight smile. "It's been vacant for a while." I should have asked more questions, but I was young, broke, and desperate. I signed the lease that same day. The first week was perfect. I'd wake up, grab coffee at Café du Monde, head to my job at the law firm downtown, and come home to my beautiful new place. The house had character creaky floorboards, old radiators that clanked at night, the smell of aged wood and history. But on the 8th night, something changed. I woke up around 2 a.m. to footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the wooden floor above me. I lived alone, and there was no attic access that I knew of. The steps would walk from one end of the ceiling to the other, then back again. Over and over, I grabbed my phone and called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" The footsteps stopped immediately. I lay there in the dark, my heart hammering in my chest, waiting. After about 10 minutes of silence, I convinced myself it was just the old house settling, or maybe rats in the walls. I eventually fell back asleep, but the next night, it happened again. And the night after that. On the 4th night, I decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and my baseball bat and headed upstairs. The second floor had 3 bedrooms, all empty except for some dust and old furniture covered in sheets. I checked every room, every closet. Nothing. That's when I noticed the door at the end of the hallway. It was painted the same color as the wall, barely visible. I'd walked past it a dozen times without noticing. There was no handle, just a small keyhole. I tried to pry it open, but it wouldn't budge. I made a mental note to ask the landlord about it tomorrow. But that night, as I lay in bed, I heard something new. Not footsteps this time. A voice. Faint, like someone whispering through the walls. "Help me. Please. Let me out." I shot up in bed, my skin covered in goosebumps. The voice was coming from upstairs, from behind that hidden door. "Who's there?" I shouted. Silence. The next morning, I went to my neighbor's house. Mrs. Delacroix was an elderly Creole woman who'd lived on the street for over 50 years. When I mentioned my address, her face went pale. "Oh, honey, you didn't," she said, shaking her head. "You didn't rent the Beaumont house. What's wrong with it?" I asked. She invited me in and made me sit down. Then she told me the story. 20 years ago, a boy named Ethan Beaumont lived there with his parents. He was a troubled kid, severe depression, anxiety, schizophrenia. His parents tried everything to help him, but nothing worked. One night, during a particularly bad episode, Ethan locked himself in the attic room. His parents tried to get him out, but before they could break down the door, he took his own life. My blood ran cold. The parents couldn't bear to stay after that, Mrs. Delacroix continued. They moved away and rented the house out. But nobody stays long. Strange things happen. People hear voices, see shadows, feel like they're being watched. The last tenant moved out after just 3 days. Why didn't anyone tell me this? I asked. She gave me a sad smile. Would you have rented it if they had? That evening, I called a locksmith. I needed to see what was behind that door. The locksmith, a burly guy named Travis, managed to pick the lock in about 15 minutes. "You sure you want to go in there?" he asked, looking uneasy. I have to know, I said. He pushed the door open, and we both peered inside. It was a small attic room with slanted ceilings. There was an old bed frame, a broken desk, and posters peeling off the wall's bands from the late 90s and early 2000s. Nirvana, Pearl Jam, The Smashing Pumpkins. But what caught my attention was the wall opposite the door. Written in what looked like dark paint or maybe dried blood were words scrawled over and over. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And underneath, in larger letters, I can't leave. Travis backed out of the room. Man, I'm out of here. You should be too. After he left, I stood in the doorway of that room, staring at those words. Despite every rational bone in my body telling me to pack my bags and run, I felt something else. Sadness. This kid had been in so much pain. That night, I decided to stay. I don't know why. Maybe I felt like running away would be abandoning Ethan to his loneliness. Around midnight, the power went out. The whole street was dark, probably a blown transformer. I lit some candles and sat in my bedroom, trying to read by candlelight. Then the temperature dropped. I could see my breath in the air, even though it was a warm September night in Louisiana. And then I saw him. At first, it was just a shadow in the corner of my room. But slowly, it took shape. A teenage boy, maybe 17 or 18, wearing baggy jeans and a flannel shirt. His hair was long and messy, and his eyes, God, his eyes were completely black, like pools of ink. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was frozen. Please don't be afraid, he said. His voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from far away. I won't hurt you, Ethan. I managed to whisper. He nodded slowly. You know my name. Your neighbor told me what happened. I'm sorry. Tears started rolling down his cheeks, but they weren't normal tears. They were dark, like oil or blood. I've been here for so long, he said. Everyone who comes here runs away. They're all so scared of me. But I'm the one who's scared. I'm alone. I've been alone for 20 years. My fear was slowly being replaced by pity. This wasn't some malevolent spirit trying to harm me. This was a kid who'd made a terrible choice and was now trapped in the aftermath. Why are you still here? I asked. Why can't you? Move on? I don't know, he said, his voice breaking. I think it's because of what I did. What I did to my parents. The pain I caused them. I never got to tell them I was sorry. I never got to say goodbye. An idea formed in my mind. Where are your parents now? I don't know. After it happened, they left. I've been stuck here ever since. The next morning, I went to the library and started researching. I found old newspaper articles about Ethan's death. The articles mentioned his parents' names, Robert and Catherine Beaumont. It took me 3 days of searching, calling and tracking down leads, but I finally found them. They were living in Baton Rouge, about an hour and a half away. When I called Robert Beaumont and explained who I was and why I was calling, there was a long silence on the other end. Is this some kind of sick joke? He finally said, No, sir. I know this sounds crazy, but I've seen him. Your son. He's still in that house. And I think he needs you. That's impossible. Our son is dead. I know. But his spirit is still there. And I think he needs closure. You both do. There was another long pause. Then I heard a woman's voice in the background, Catherine. After a muffled conversation, Robert came back on the line. We'll come, he said quietly. Tomorrow. The next evening, Robert and Catherine Beaumont stood in my living room. They looked older than their years, worn down by grief that had never fully healed. He appears at night, I told them. usually around midnight. We waited. Catherine sat on my couch, clutching her husband's hand, tears already streaming down her face. Robert stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. Just after midnight, the temperature dropped. Catherine gasped, and Robert stood up. And then Ethan appeared. He materialized slowly, his ghostly form becoming more solid. When he saw his parents, his face crumpled. "Mom? Dad?" Catherine let out a sob. "Ethan. Oh God, Ethan." "I'm so sorry," Ethan said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for what I did, for the pain I caused you. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just so sick, and I couldn't see any other way out." "We know, baby," Catherine said, standing up and stepping toward him. "We know you were sick. It wasn't your fault. We should have done more," Robert said, his own voice thick with tears. "We should have gotten you better help. We failed you, son." "No," Ethan said. "You did everything you could. I couldn't accept help. But I need you to know that I loved you. I always loved you." "We love you too," Catherine said. "We never stopped loving you. Not for one single day." Robert walked forward. "Son, we forgive you. For everything. And we need you to forgive us too, for not being able to save you." As they spoke those words, something incredible happened. The room began to fill with light, a warm golden glow that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Ethan's form became less shadowy, more translucent. "I can feel it," he said, looking down at his hands. "I can feel something pulling me. It doesn't hurt. It feels peaceful." "Then go, baby," Catherine said. "Go and be at peace. Will I see you again?" Ethan asked. "Someday," Robert said, "when it's our time. But not for a long while yet." Ethan smiled a real, genuine smile. "Thank you. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for forgiving me." The light grew brighter, and Ethan's form began to fade. "I love you both," he said. "We love you too," they said in unison, and then he was gone. The light faded, and the room returned to normal. Catherine collapsed into Robert's arms, sobbing. I stood there, tears running down my own face, witnessing something I still can't fully explain. The Beaumonts stayed for another hour. We talked about Ethan, about who he was before the illness took hold, about happy memories they'd cherished. It was the first time in 20 years they'd been able to talk about their son without drowning in guilt and grief. Before they left, Catherine hugged me tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "You gave us both our son back, even if just for a moment. You gave us closure." After they left, I went upstairs to the attic room. The words on the wall, "I'm sorry, and I can't leave," had vanished, as if they'd never been there. I stayed in that house for another 6 months before my job transferred me to Houston. During that time, I never heard another footstep, never saw another shadow, never felt another cold spot. The house felt peaceful, almost happy. Now, 3 years later, I think about Ethan often. I think about how sometimes the scariest things aren't evil. They're just sad and lost and lonely. I think about how much pain people can carry, both the living and the dead, and I think about forgiveness, how powerful it is, how healing it can be, how it can quite literally set someone free. Ethan wasn't a monster. He was a sick kid who made a tragic choice and got trapped by his own guilt and his parents' grief. All he needed was what we all need: love, understanding, and forgiveness. Sometimes I drive past that house when I'm back in New Orleans. It's been rented out to a young family now. I see kids playing in the yard, hear laughter coming from inside. The house has moved on, just like Ethan finally did. And whenever I face something scary or difficult in my own life, I remember that night. I remember that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not run away from the darkness, But turn around and face it with compassion, because that's when real healing begins, for ghosts and for the living alike. Hello? His voice sounded small and foolish in the vast space. Section E was empty, the barrels and containers sitting exactly as they had been during his last patrol. But as he approached the chain-link barrier to Section F, his flashlight beam caught something that made his stomach drop. A pool of dark liquid was spreading from beneath the fence, creeping across the concrete floor like spilled ink. Marcus fumbled for his phone and called. Dale. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. He tried twice more with the same result. The emergency protocol binder had been clear. In case of a spill, evacuate the area and call hazmat. But the liquid was already spreading, and Marcus could see that it was seeping from a barrel that had apparently toppled over in section. The gate to Section F was locked with a combination padlock. Dale had the code, but Dale wasn't answering. Marcus stood there, watching the pool grow larger, his mind racing. The environmental sensors on the wall were still green. Maybe it wasn't that serious. Maybe it was just water, or something equally harmless that happened to look ominous in the dark. Then the smell hit him. It was unlike anything Marcus had ever encountered, acrid and sharp, with an underlying sweetness that was somehow worse than if it had been purely foul. It clawed at the back of his throat and made his eyes water instantly. He stumbled backward, pulling his shirt up over his nose and mouth, but the smell seemed to penetrate everything. His phone rang, making him jump. It was Dale. Marcus, listen to me very carefully. Dale's voice was tight with urgency. Are you near Section F? Yes, there's a spill. I can smell it. Get out. Now, don't ask questions. Don't try to contain it. Just get out of the building and call 911. What is it? What spilled? Marcus. Dale's voice cracked like a whip. You need to leave now. But Marcus had already made a terrible mistake. In his panic and confusion, he had stepped closer to the fence, and his boot had made contact with the edge of the spreading liquid. It soaked through the leather almost instantly, and within seconds, Marcus felt a burning sensation against his skin. He ran. Through Section E, through D, his lungs burning as he gasped bitter air that didn't taste like chemicals. His boot squelched with each step, and the burning in his foot intensified from uncomfortable warmth to searing pain. He could hear Dale still shouting through the phone. He dropped somewhere near the fence. Marcus burst through the front entrance into the rain, gulping down the cool air. He collapsed onto the wet pavement, frantically unlacing his boot. When he finally wrenched it off, he saw that his sock had partially dissolved, and the skin of his foot was an angry red, already beginning to blister. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Someone, probably Dale, had called emergency services. Within minutes, the parking lot was flooded with flashing lights. Firefighters in hazmat suits entered the building while paramedics tended to Marcus's chemical burn, wrapping his foot in specialized gauze and starting an IV. What was in there? Marcus asked the paramedic, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a grin set to her mouth. What did I step in? We won't know until they identify it, she said. But based on the burn pattern, it's probably some kind of acid compound. You're lucky you got out when you did. Lucky. The word rattled around Marcus's head as they loaded him into the ambulance. He didn't feel lucky. His foot throbbed with each heartbeat, and every breath still carried that sickly sweet chemical smell. As if it had permanently embedded itself in his sinuses. At the hospital, doctors cleaned and treated the burn, warning him that he'd need follow-up appointments and might have permanent scarring. But the physical injury was just the beginning of Marcus's nightmare. The headache started 3 days later. Blinding, nauseating pain had made him vomit and sent him back to the emergency room. CT scans revealed nothing. The doctors suggested stress, dehydration, caffeine withdrawal. They sent him home with painkillers that barely touched the agony splitting his skull. Then came the nosebleeds. Spontaneous, profuse, frightening. Blood would pour from his nose without warning, staining his shirts and alarming his roommate. More hospital visits. More tests. More doctors looking baffled and suggesting increasingly unlikely diagnoses. Marcus tried calling Dale, tried calling Beaumont Chemical Storage, but the number was disconnected. When he drove out to the facility 2 weeks after the incident, he found it shuttered, with official-looking notices plastered across the doors. The entire site had been condemned by the EPA. It was another week before a lawyer named Sarah Mendez showed up at his apartment. She was accompanied by a man in a suit who introduced himself as being from the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. "Mr. Chun," Sarah said, settling onto his threadbare couch, "we need to talk about what you were exposed to that night. The barrel that had spilled," they explained, had been improperly stored and inadequately labeled. It contained an experimental pesticide compound from the 1970s, something that had never made it to market because early testing had revealed it to be catastrophically toxic. The manufacturer had gone bankrupt in 1982, and their waste products, including drums of this failed pesticide, had been shuffled between storage facilities for decades. The compound contains organophosphates and several heavy metals, the DEP official said, his voice clinical. Plus some proprietary elements we're still analyzing. What you experienced, the chemical burn, the neurological symptoms, these are all consistent with acute poisoning. Am I going to die? Marcus asked bluntly. Sarah reached out and touched his hand. We don't know the long-term effects. The company that made this stuff is long gone, and there's almost no data on human exposure. But we're going to get you the best medical care possible, and we're going to hold every responsible party accountable. The lawsuit that followed was Byzantine and frustrating. Beaumont Chemical Storage declared bankruptcy almost immediately. The property owner claimed ignorance. The original chemical manufacturer was defunct. Marcus found himself caught in a legal labyrinth while his body continued to betray him. The neurological symptoms worsened. Memory problems. Difficulty concentrating. Tremors in his hands that made simple tasks frustrating. Chronic fatigue that left him unable to work. At 23, Marcus had gone from a healthy young man to someone who struggled to get through a day without collapsing. Other victims emerged. 6 other workers who had been in the facility during various shifts over the previous year came forward with similar symptoms. One, a 50-year-old named Thomas, died of liver failure 8 months after Marcus's exposure. The autopsy revealed concentrations of heavy metals in his tissues that the pathologist described as incompatible with life. Yet, Thomas had somehow survived months before his organs finally gave out. The media picked up the story. Toxic warehouse poisons workers, read one headline. Forgotten chemicals from the past haunt the present, read another. Marcus gave interviews from his hospital bed, his tremoring hands visible as cameras captured his deterioration. But the real horror wasn't just what the chemical had done to his body. It was what he learned about the facility's history. A researcher for Sarah's legal team uncovered documents showing that Beaumont Chemical Storage had known about improperly stored materials for at least 15 years. Previous inspections had noted concerns. Employees had filed complaints. Nothing had been done. The cost of proper disposal was too high, the regulatory oversight too lax, and the assumption had been that the old barrels would simply continue sitting in Section F until bureaucracy eventually caught up. Marcus had been sacrificed on the altar of corporate cost-cutting and regulatory failure. 2 years after the incident, Marcus sat in a courtroom as a judge approved a settlement. The money was substantial, enough to cover medical bills and provide some financial security, but it felt meaningless. His foot still bore the scars of the chemical burn. His hands still shook. He still suffered blinding headaches and crushing fatigue. Doctors had confirmed the presence of heavy metals in his bloodstream that would likely never fully clear. The warehouse was demolished. The site was designated for environmental remediation that would take decades. Section F's contents were carefully cataloged and removed by specialists. In full protective gear, the kind of protection Marcus should have had that night, but didn't even know he needed. On the 3rd anniversary of the spill, Marcus visited the empty lot where the warehouse had stood. Chain-link fence surrounded bare dirt, and warning signs promised that cleanup was ongoing. He stood in the rain, much like the rain that had fallen that terrible night, and thought about the invisible violence of toxic chemicals. There had been no monster in that warehouse, no knife-wielding maniac or supernatural entity, just barrels of forgotten poison, slowly degrading in the darkness, waiting for an unlucky moment and an unknowing victim. The horror was mundane and bureaucratic, and all the more terrifying for its banality. Marcus still has nightmares, not of the spill itself, but of that smell, sickly sweet and sharp, that seems to lurk just at the edge of his perception, waiting to pull him back to that night. His doctors say the olfactory hallucinations are another symptom of the neurological damage. Phantom smells conjured by a brain that will never fully recover from what it encountered. The real horror, Marcus learned, isn't always the dramatic or the supernatural. Sometimes it's simply a barrel of toxic chemicals in a forgotten corner of a warehouse, and a system that valued profit over safety, convenience over caution, until someone paid the price. He was that someone. And his story is a reminder that the most terrifying horror stories are often the ones that are completely, devastatingly real.